Every evening, when the house finally goes quiet, Dmitry opens the same old thread on his phone, the termination letter. He knows it almost by heart, and still rereads it. And then, for the 100th time, he replays in his head a conversation that never happened. The moment his former boss says, in front of everyone, "We were wrong. You were treated unfairly." Dmitry is 50. 15 years at one company, not a single reprimand. A year and a half ago, he was let go over a contract that someone else actually blew. A young manager who didn't show up on the day it mattered, for a meeting with the auditors. Dmitry knows this for certain. So do 3 colleagues. But no one said it out loud. On the outside, he's been fine for a long time. Another job, the same money. That conversation won't happen. Dmitry understands this with his mind. But something inside is still waiting. Maybe today the message comes. Dmitry has heard the advice 100 times. Just forgive and move on, as if nothing happened. And every time it broke against one thing, he really is not to blame for any of it. 15 honest years. That very rightness holds him tighter than any lock. Today's conversation isn't about surviving the blow itself. A firing, an affair, a betrayal. A person somehow survives it, sooner or later. It's about what stays inside months and years later, when everything is long over on the outside and nothing ends on the inside. It seems logical. The less your fault in what happened, the faster it should let go. Your conscience is clear. There's nothing to sort out. In practice, it's almost always the opposite. If Dmitry had cut a corner somewhere, missed something, there would be somewhere to put the pain. Deal with your part. Take the lesson. But he was flawless. And that very flawlessness turns the wound into a question with no answer. What for? Good, honest people get stuck in this harder than those who are at least a little at fault themselves. The less your fault, the tighter resentment holds. Injustice cuts sharper than shame. And here's a question worth asking before the answer. What if it isn't about the betrayal at all? You can see it in 2 very different lives, in people whose pain looks nothing like Dmitry's. Olga is 47. 3 years ago, her husband left for a woman 12 years younger, and since then, by every outward sign, her life has come together. She pushed her career, started taking care of herself, made new friends. But let his name come up in conversation, at someone's birthday, in a line at the doctor's, anywhere. And Olga, in a light tone, as if in passing, asks, "So how's he doing these days?" And then, on the way home, she takes the answer apart in more detail than she ever took apart her husband while she was married to him. Not because she misses him, because she's looking for one thing: signs that he's unhappy. A catch in the other person's voice. The word supposedly before fine. Anything that would say, he's paying too. When there are no such signs, and there almost never are, because people talking about someone's ex usually spare them or simply don't dig in, Olga sinks for a day or two into a heaviness she has no name for. Not sadness. Something like, so it was all for nothing. So I'm the only one here paying for the 2 of us. There's a version of this same trap that lives not for years, but for decades, because it starts in childhood, when a person couldn't yet even name what was happening to them. Svetlana is 58. At every family dinner, and there have been hundreds over half a century, sooner or later the same story surfaces. How at 10 she was bought a coat 2 sizes too big to grow into, while her younger brother got a new one, exactly his size, because a boy needs to look decent at school. Svetlana tells it now without resentment in her voice, with a honed, almost professional precision, Like a lawyer reading out testimony the courtroom has heard 100 times. Her mother has been dead 8 years. The coat rotted away in some landfill back in the 90s. But the case is open. Svetlana keeps prosecuting it before her nephews, her husband, the random guests at the table who hear the story for the first time and don't understand why a grown woman with grandchildren of her own trembles telling them about a coat. The offender is gone. There's no one to apologize. And that's exactly why this wound is the most stubborn of all. Justice here is physically impossible to restore, and Svetlana keeps running a trial in which the defendant will never again appear in the courtroom. Here's what actually connects Dmitry, Olga, and Svetlana. And it isn't the betrayal itself. Dmitry isn't to blame for that contract. Olga isn't to blame that her husband chose someone else. Svetlana isn't to blame that her mother loved her differently than her brother. All three suffered less deservedly than anyone could ever say to their face. And that's exactly why the same honest, legitimate sentence sounds inside all three. I did not deserve to be treated like that. That sentence is true, and it has to be said, but get stuck in it, not pass through it, but pitch camp in it, and it slowly turns into self-pity. And self-pity is no longer pain. It's a way of living next to pain so that it never goes anywhere. The feeling that you were treated unfairly isn't a mistake. The mistake is to move in and live there. Self-pity has a feature that makes it so sticky. It gives relief, real, tangible, almost physical. It never says, live through this and move on. It says, let's stay here just 5 more minutes. And unnoticed, those 5-minute stretches add up to those same 15 years. That relief washes over Dmitry when a former colleague happens to drop, yeah, it really wasn't your fault. Over Olga, when a friend calls her husband a scumbag for the 100th time. Over Svetlana, when her niece shakes her head, poor Aunt Sveta, how could they treat you like that? You've been acknowledged. Your pain has been witnessed. But that relief never fills you. It works like a painkiller whose effect gets shorter every time. An hour, and it aches again. Self-pity is insatiable, not because a person is weak, but because it asks for confirmation not from the world in general, but from the offender himself. And the offender is in no hurry to confirm. Dmitry's former boss doesn't call. Everyone around somehow speaks of Olga's ex-husband as a man for whom everything is wonderful. And Svetlana's mother, even if she were alive, would most likely genuinely not understand what this was even about. And then life gradually reorganizes itself around waiting. Dmitry keeps an empty seat for one conversation in every evening. Olga keeps the same question ready, in case someone says his name. Svetlana keeps a place at the table where, every few months, she takes out that coat again. It's the same waiting room, from which all the trains left long ago. Each just has their own bench and their own reason to sit on it. While you wait for his call, you're the one locked up, not him. The same logic works when a close friend betrays you. One who was there for years then quietly left, taking something important without a single conversation. And when a business partner siphoned money through shell accounts, then opened a new company as if nothing happened. The form differs. The mechanics are the same. Until the needed admission is spoken, a part of you stands and waits at a closed door. If you just recognize not one character but two, or all three, don't rush to click away. What comes next is about what you can actually do with this. Here's what really has to be sorted out. Without it, there's nowhere to go from here. The justice Dmitry, Olga, and Svetlana are waiting for is impossible. Not because the world is cruel, but because it physically cannot give back what was taken. Even if Dmitry's former boss one day calls and apologizes, that won't give back 15 honest years. Even if Olga's ex-husband writes her an honest letter about how guilty he is, that won't give back the years she lived in a marriage she turned out not to know everything about. Even if Svetlana's mother were alive and said the right words about the coat, it wouldn't make Svetlana a 10-year-old girl again with an ordinary, normal childhood. Admission doesn't undo what happened. It's just one more event on top of the old one. The justice you've waited years for will repay the debt. It won't give you back to yourself. To admit the wound is real, that's the truth. And it needs to be admitted honestly, without shame. Not, come on, forget it. Not everyone goes through this. The wound is real. The pain is genuine. The injustice was genuine injustice. That is not up for debate. But it's one thing to come to the wound, look it straight in the face, and name it out loud. It's quite another to move in and hang curtains. You can hear it in the way people speak. One person says, "They did something vile to me back then," and goes on about their day. Another, 30 years later, still starts the morning from there, makes decisions from there, trusts people or doesn't from there. The wound stopped being an event and became the return address from which they write everything else in their life. Are you talking to your wound right now, or already living at its address? The answer doesn't have to come fast. Sometimes it takes not one evening, but several years of watching yourself. The offender moved on long ago, and you're still standing guard over a wound you yourself won't let close. C.S. Lewis once noticed a strange thing about time. The past is already frozen. You can't change it, no matter how many times you replay it. The future you're waiting for, that call, that apology, doesn't belong to you yet, and may never come. There's only one point left where a person truly lives: the present. And it's exactly that point you hand over, whole, every evening, to someone who left long ago. Everything that's really yours happens now, and you spend that now guarding what can't be brought back, and begging for what may never come. It's the same waiting room. Dmitry sits there an evening at the kitchen table. Olga, a few minutes in the car after a conversation where his name happened to come up. Svetlana, one evening at the holiday table every few months. All three pay with the same coin, the only time they truly have. And here, finally, about what forgiveness is. A word worn down to near meaninglessness, one that many people are rightly irritated by. Forgiveness isn't justifying the offender. It doesn't say, what the former boss or husband or mother did was fine, forgivable, let's move past it. It doesn't cancel the reality of the betrayal, and doesn't demand pretending nothing happened. Forgiveness is, I refuse to pay for his choice a second time, now with my own life. Forgiveness is the release of the wounded one from the loop of waiting. It means your wholeness no longer depends on whether the offender admits guilt or not, whether he's suffering now or thriving, whether he even remembers you or forgot long ago. Here's what it looks like not in theory, but on a specific evening, when your hand reaches somewhere it shouldn't. First, notice the moment when I have a right to this pain turns into, am obligated to hold on to this pain, or I betray myself. These are different things. A right is freedom. An obligation is already a trap. For Svetlana, that moment came at one of the last dinners, when for the 100th time she began, remember, they bought me that coat, and suddenly cut herself off mid-sentence. Not because she was tired, because for the first time in 30 years she managed to ask herself, why am I doing this right now? Who needs it besides me? Second, name out loud to yourself, not to the offender, exactly what you're waiting for. A call? An apology? For his life to fall apart? When Dmitry first forced himself to answer this honestly, he was surprised to find he was waiting for words his former boss will physically never say. That man doesn't consider himself guilty at all. Waiting for it is the same as waiting for a letter from someone who moved away long ago, leaving no address. Third, decide what to do with the energy that used to go into rehearsing a conversation with the offender inside your head. For Dmitry, by his own count, that took about 40 minutes every evening. Aim it not into thoughts about him, but into one concrete action for your own life. A call to someone who's truly there. A task long postponed. an ordinary walk. Not because you need a distraction, but because it literally takes territory back from the waiting. Fourth, let yourself say out loud that the justice you want won't come, and that this isn't a defeat, just a fact. Olga understood this one evening, coming back from someone's birthday where, once again, she'd carefully fished among near strangers for how her ex-husband was doing. And suddenly she saw herself from the outside, a woman looking not so much for an answer as for proof that the world had, after all, restored justice. And right then, unpleasantly, she understood a second thing. The world very often doesn't do that. Not out of malice, it's simply not obligated to settle her score. That's not a defeat. It's just a fact you can live with, or you can spend another 10 years waiting. As long as a person's wholeness depends on someone else's admission of guilt, they are essentially handing control of their life to the one who betrayed them. The offender becomes the secret manager of their peace. If he wants to apologize, he will. If he doesn't, he won't. And the person keeps checking against someone else's will. It's worth asking yourself honestly one day, where was my wholeness supposed to come from in the first place, if not from this person? You are not God to yourself. You can't will back what was taken, and you're not required to handle it alone. But you're also not the eternal debtor of your own resentment, obligated to carry it as the only proof that life was unfair to you. There is one before whom your worth never depended on whether the offender acknowledged you or not. That footing was there before him, before the betrayal itself. And when a person one day truly leans into this, not with the mind, but as into a wall you can finally rest against, they stop being the guard at a closed door and take back the key that was theirs all along. Olga no longer asks about her ex-husband the moment his name comes up. Not because she forgot, she just stopped looking in other people's answers for proof that the world owes her something. At the next family dinner, Svetlana mentioned that coat again, but in passing, in a single line, for the first time in 30 years as a detail of childhood, not a verdict to be read out in full. The case shed run for 30 years before an empty defendant's seat. She finally closed herself, without a single apology from the one who can no longer physically give it. Let's go back to Dmitry that evening at the kitchen table. He still sometimes opens the old thread. A 15-year habit doesn't leave at the snap of a finger. But something has changed. He stopped waiting for that conversation. Not because everything's fine now, but because one day he told himself honestly, this man doesn't consider himself guilty and will never say the words. And if his own life is on pause until someone else's call, then the key to it was never in that man's hands. He took that key back. Not with a dramatic gesture, not with a single one-time decision, but by ceasing to keep an empty seat in his own evening for a conversation that will never happen. He started calling his son for no reason, something he hadn't done in about 3 years, because all his evenings went to something else. The injustice hasn't gone anywhere from his biography. It just stopped being the address he lives at. There's a simple question worth asking yourself honestly, without pretty answers. How many more evenings are you willing to give to a person who moved on long ago and doesn't even suspect you're still waiting for him? If you recognized here not just other people's stories, but your own bench in this waiting room, get up from it and hit like. That way this conversation reaches those stuck in the same kind of waiting. And in the comments, write one word. The thing you're still waiting for and never got. Did you think of someone who's also guarding an old grudge? Forward them this video. Sometimes someone else's words land faster than your own.